The biggest names in sports are all on IsraelSportsRadio.com.
On the line now is a big treat, is an honor, is a privilege to introduce to the IsraelSportsRadio.com fan base a big hero of mine, someone I watched a lot growing up. He's starred in Midnight Run with Robert De Niro, had his own show on CNBC, The Charles Grodin Show. That would be Mr. Charles Grodin. Mr. Grodin, are you there?
Yes, and I want to play Israeli baseball.
I'm sure. Look, I said my kids play. I've seen the level of talent. I think if you grab the leather, I'm sure you could be in that.
I tried out when I went to high school in Pittsburgh. I tried out for the pitching staff on when I was a freshman, and we all went into the gym, and there were about 10 of us trying out, and when the baseball coach walked past me, he says, don't throw it so hard. So I didn't throw it so hard. And as he walked back down the line, he tapped me on the shoulder and cut me.
That sounds.
Then I was told that if you could get a hit, because the pitchers dominated at a certain age, if you could just get a hit, you'd make the team. But I got a hit, but I still didn't make the team. It wasn't that much of a hit. It was just something that squeezed through between first and second base. But it wasn't for lack of trying. But what I should have realized when I actually saw the team, we actually, as a senior at that time, when I was a freshman, we had somebody go up and actually pitch for the Boston Red Sox and played with Ted Williams. His name was Russell Kammerer.
Right.
And so there was some strong talent on that team, and I probably would have been better off as a third base coach.
It sounds like that coach is playing some Phil Jackson mind games.
Oh yeah, probably. I'll tell you a story. Something had happened around that time too. We were playing intramural. I think it must have been baseball, and a student teacher came over from the University of Pittsburgh. And I can't, who can explain yourself? I can just tell you what happened. I was the captain of one team, and and the student teacher from University of Pittsburgh, who looked like a grown man. I must have been like 140 pounds, 5'2", as a 15-year-old. And I just said to him, "Do you think it's fair that you're the coach of the other team and the umpire?" And I ask these kind of questions. I mean, they are what they are. I don't mean that. That's a serious question. Do you think that's a fair thing? And he could have said yes or no or said whatever he wanted. He didn't say anything. But we got back to the locker room. He lifted me off my feet, which he could do. He was like a full-grown guy. And he lifted me off my feet and said he was going to punch me right in the face. At that point, the other sophomores in the high school gathered around. And I, off my feet, being held up there by him, just looked at him as if to say, go ahead. Because what that would have done to his whatever it was, his career, his life, he could have been locked up for that, hit a kid in the face. But it's amazing how people get carried away, particularly when it gets to sports. It's like a different person takes over.
Oh yeah, I mean it's funny. Speaking of coach and umpire, I mean that happens here in Israel. I mean it's limited resources as far as people who understand the game. So you can kind of do it all, but. Yeah, I mean, I've seen Ari and I, we go out, we see local football and everything. Yeah. When emotion takes over, just step back and watch.
Well, I did when I was a commentator for 60 Minutes too, I did a piece where I went to the New York Mets spring training, and I one of the parts of what I was doing was I was talking to the then manager, Bobby Valentine, about he would be a good role model if he wouldn't get into umpire's face and argue that much. I would look for more politeness from you on the field. And he's sitting there nodding. He was a friend of mine. He is a friend of mine. He's nodding. No, I see. No, I know what you mean. It's important to be polite and don't yell at people on the field. Of course, that's what he did. And then I went to John Franco, who was probably, I think he has more saves than any left-hand pitcher in the history of baseball. And I suggested to him, since he'd been pitching his whole life with his left hand, he probably had a fresh right arm. Let me see you try that. Well, of course, he couldn't even get it to the catcher with the other arm. I said, all right, we'll let that go. We'll let that one go.
I mean, if you went to the Mets spring training this year, you might have been put on the team, actually.
Well, I've been involved with them over several years. I haven't lately, but I remember when Mike Piazza was the catcher, and I said to him, this is all on film. I said to him, Mike, you're Hall of Fame, you're a great catcher, everything, but you're the quiet man of the team. And for a catcher, I mean, consider giving us more like, come on, and Mike Piazza is just staring at me, and I go, well, whatever, if you're whatever you're, and I'm backing away, whatever you're comfortable. No, all right, forget it. That doesn't matter, And I just, but I told him before, and all you have to do is stare at me, and he said, oh, I can do that,
I want to ask. I said this at the beginning of the show. Now, my life as a teenager was not the most popular type of teenager. I was on the chess team, and didn't date too much and whatnot. But I look forward to every day after coming home from school, watching your show on CNBC, the Charles Grodin Show. Very intellectual show. Really liked it. Do you think the days of the intellectual show are over? We have the reality TV and this other stuff out there. Do you think shows like yours back in the day are done, or can there be a renaissance, if you will?
I'm going to give you my wife's private line and use that intellectual word on her, if you don't mind. I essentially today, people find this hard to believe, but because I do commentary on CBS Radio every day, and I write a column for the Daily News website once a week, and I write books and plays and movie scripts and stuff like that, what I essentially watch is the news and read the newspapers. So I've seen some of it. It looks to me like a lot of hand grenade throwing back and forth.
Wow.
I was once, to promote a book, I was on Sean Hannity's cable show on Fox, and he came out in favor of waterboarding. He didn't consider that to be a form of torture, and I asked him if he would consider being waterboarded for a charity. And he agreed to do it. Well, I got calls from Chris Matthews and Keith Olbermann to come on the show. I said, I don't want to perpetuate this. I was just trying to have some fun with Sean there, It's okay to waterboard, but, not me, boss. Let me know if he's going to be waterboarded for charity, So, and then, of course, John McCain later came out more recently saying, as someone, as you know, who was tortured during Vietnam, he seriously doubted that what you're going to get from waterboarding anyone or torturing in any way is going to be accurate information, because at that point anyone will say anything. So there's a real disagreement on what the facts were that led to the death of Osama bin Laden. I don't know the answer to your question. Some of the shows, I think 60 Minutes tries to keep it at a certain level. You really want to be careful, and this is true, of course. Even Glenn Beck for Fox got to be too much. Where he was getting big ratings for them, but they couldn't wait to get rid of him. It was so radical. And even in some of the politicians, what they're saying about each other. This one fellow, I get them all mixed up. Rand Paul, whatever. One of these guys, he came out in favor of legalizing heroin, legalizing prostitution. Now that's a Republican candidate. So I don't know. The whole thing seems to be today in the paper. I think I read that. Sarah Palin thinks Donald Trump should run for president, and Donald Trump thinks that Sarah Palin should run for president. Both of them are about as qualified to be president as I am, which is not at all. Of course, who is qualified to be president? It's quite something to say, I should be the leader of the free world. Can you imagine? Can you imagine even wanting that responsibility?
That's what, especially now. I always have told the story that, I'm from Richmond, Virginia, and I remember growing up, my parents were, good old, Jewish Democrats, and
Right.
And I remember when President Ford came to town, my father loaded us in the car and took us to see him, and I said, but he's a Republican. He said, no, he's the president. And it's just those days are just gone. And
it really is. In fact, I'm very loath in the commentaries to go after a president. I thought when President Bush decided to attack Iraq, that was worth, what are you doing? What on earth are we bombing Iraq for? And then, of course, Donald Rumsfeld and former President Bush came out and said that they consider the world a safer place without Saddam Hussein. Of course, they haven't talked about how many thousands of people were killed. Iraqis, children, innocent people, American soldiers, and the world is the world a safer place without Saddam Hussein? Who knows?
Right.
It doesn't seem very safe. Every page of the paper, every story is about a civil war. If it's not if it's not Yemen, if it's not Libya, it seems like there's about 8 or 9 of them at all times. And so we should send troops on the ground to these places.
Right.
We had an ironic thing happen where I am right now in Westport, Connecticut, where a boy was home on leave from Iraq before being deployed to Afghanistan. It's about a year and a half ago, and he's killed in a car crash in Westport, Connecticut, drunk driving situation. Just when you think you've heard everything, between Iraq and Afghanistan, he dies in Westport, Connecticut. So we should be thankful for every single thing we have, because so many people have these tragedies strike them right between the eyes.
No, well said. I mean, in Israel, we deal with this all the time, in that there's a war a few years, and everyone's walking around with guns, and it's something we kind of got used to.
Right.
But it's kind of the way it is out here.
Right, but
Wait, you're in Israel right now, is that right?
We're in Jerusalem, yeah.
Yeah, you're in. So let me ask you something, because my understanding of this, and I've been looking into it, the pre-1967 borders, if I understand this correctly, if you took Manhattan north to south, which is about 12 miles, and made it go east-west, that's the depth of Israel prior to the 1967 war.
It's 9 miles, exactly.
9 miles.
Yep.
All right, so that means if you went back to those borders, they could easily launch rocket attacks.
Oh, from anywhere. Yeah, it would just be a disaster.
Why, I'm loath to do this because it's so easy to criticize, but within the same week, President Obama, he said that, go back to and then the rest of what he said, I couldn't even follow it, but he did say prior to 1967 war, those borders. Then within that same week, he went down and actually made jokes about the issue on the Mexican border, saying that maybe we should have a moat with alligators. And the people down there, I'm not even talking about illegal immigration. I'm talking about smuggling of weapons and drugs and crime and killings.
Right.
So I didn't understand. It's like you want somebody to say, gee, I wouldn't be doing any jokes about that. People are being killed in that dangerous border area, and what on earth would you suggest going back to the pre-1967 border between the Israelis and the Palestinians? Right. I mean, gee, I was a president in high school, but I would know enough not to ever say that, and I'm also know enough not to run for office past high school.
More importantly.
Well, was nice
more importantly, indeed. In fact, I was actually, this is a true story, I was actually, when I was 10 years old, and I was president of my 5th grade class, I was impeached. I was impeached at the age of 10. The teacher said for talking incessantly, which is true of me now. It's hard to believe I would do that when I was 10 years old. I don't know that I knew that many words. In fact, I remember saying to her, what's incessantly mean? She said, look it up in a dictionary. I said, okay, I will. It could have been that I was impeached because I said, why single file, no talking? All the classes are changing at the same time, and people don't like those kind of questions. I don't know what it's like in Israel, but this is all true. I was actually kicked out of Hebrew school when I was 11 because I asked the rabbi what the Hebrew words meant that we were reciting on the blackboard. I never mean to be a wise guy, but I might have asked. In fairness, I probably asked more than once, and he kicked me out of the school. So I'm pretty much used to this, and I don't see it coming because I consider these reasonable questions, and maybe he didn't know. A lot more people can speak Yiddish than can speak Hebrew. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure that's true. Is that true in Israel today? Is that true?
I mean, Hebrew's the modern language, but trust me, there are plenty of people walking around Jerusalem speaking Yiddish. That's
and
for sure.
Also only speaking English, as me and Andy could tell you.
Right,
we don't speak Hebrew when we live here. So
yeah, I mean, my grandfather actually trained and became a Talmudic scholar, and that's the only way I knew him. He ultimately trained me for my bar mitzvah, and but he essentially stopped making a living when he was like a young man. So that responsibility fell to my grandmother, and she did it. I mean, it sounds good. My grandfather was a Talmudic scholar, but who supported the family?
Right.
I mean, there are those responsibilities too.
No, those are questions that come in Israel all the time, and it's a tough issue. And actually, real quick to the 67 borders comments by President Obama. It's sad when Gene Simmons from KISS has to be the voice of reason. Am I right?
Say that, Gene Simmons what?
There's a YouTube...
The singing group.
Right,
yeah,
right.
There's a YouTube video, I'm not sure if you've seen it yet, where Gene Simmons speaks, because he grew up in Israel for the first 8-9 years of his life. So he speaks for about 2.5 minutes explaining, well, Obama really hasn't been here before except for one time, and he doesn't know what he's talking about. And I'm thinking we have to have Gene Simmons explain to us why this.
Oh gosh, oh boy.
Now, I mean, your almost 40-year career in movies. Is there a movie that you just say that's my favorite?
Let's back up now. Wait a minute. My first movie was 1964. How long ago was that?